Hello and welcome to the Cyber Distortion podcast Season 4. Kevin and Jason are excited to be back for another awesome season with great guests and inspiring conversation. Tonight, the guys talk about generational technology and mindsets. This episode is entitled ALT-GEN, Resetting the Generational Tech Divide. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Cyber Distortion podcast. We are introducing Season 4, Episode 1, and we're ready to go. We're so excited to get started again. You know, it's been a little bit of a quiet time, maybe a little bit, Kevin, as we took a look at like what we wanted to try to accomplish in this new season. And I got to tell you guys, we're starting off with a bang. We have aligned ourselves with some premier sponsors. And we're really excited about having premier sponsors this year as we go in because it just helps us spread this word, the knowledge of cybersecurity and AI to a larger audience. And so, yeah, we got a lot of fun and exciting things ahead of us. So want to give a shout out to our friends over at Threat Locker, Alacronet, and Fulcrum Technologies, because without you guys, we could not start to expand and increase our reach to as many people as you guys will allow us to do by sponsoring us. As always, if you guys are interested, if you know someone interested in sponsoring this podcast, give us a shout out. Let's talk. There's a lot that goes into that, and there's good parts for us being able to spread the word and getting the word out for your organization as well in several different ways, which you'll see as we continue on through this episode and through episodes throughout this season. But with that, Kevin, what are your thoughts about getting started?
Man, it seems like we just ended season 3, and man, I tell you what, we've been planning for season 4 since about midway through season 3, so it feels like this has been a long time coming. I'm excited. We've got some really cool things coming this season that I'm excited about. I love the fact that we have the help from the sponsors this season to try to bring more content to more people. Hopefully that'll make it easier to grow. Hopefully that'll help us, to support more live events, which we've started doing as of last year. Really enjoy that. We do a lot of the live events through the Cyber Circus Network, which is our other podcast network. We do that with a lot of our friends. It's awesome. And those live events are just a lot of fun. So looking forward to more live events this year, and looking forward to the conference, man. Conference season will be here before we know it. I know it's only basically March, but man, it's going to be August before we know it. It's going to be May. There's going to be RSA. There's going to be Black Hat coming up after that. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as we were getting started with this podcast episode tonight, thinking about what our next event's going to be that we're doing a live show at. Where are we going to be meeting people and talking more shop with and getting to understand the landscape now in 2025 for cybersecurity and even the emerging threats that we are seeing with Gen AI. So just so many exciting things on the horizon in 2025. But tonight we have a really interesting episode. It's not a topic that we've hit on very much. We've hit on it here and there over the last 3 seasons, but tonight we're really focusing in on the generational uh, differences with entering into the tech field, understanding technology, and how do we, as practitioners in technology, operate with various other generations that may not have the same ways of thinking that we all have had as we've come along within our generation. And there's reasons for all of that that we're going to get into tonight. Um, but I'm really stoked about this and talking about it in further detail. And, like I said, Kevin, it's not something that we've hit on a whole lot. Um, but, let's see if we can pull this one off, man, and jump into our first segment.
Yeah, the key thing that's weird about this is we're normally focused in on a particular technology or a particular topic that centers around some sort of specific technology within cybersecurity, and this is going to be more of a broad conversation, more focused on, as Jason said, the different ways we problem solve across various generations. We all have to coexist in this industry, and we thought it would be kind of cool to look at that. Why different generational perspectives matter and how they come into play as you start getting into the corporate world or into the cybersecurity arena and having to problem solve and having to uh, accomplish things with other people as a team. So with that,
Absolutely.
yeah, let's jump into segment one and just talk about. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation for us.
So let me kick this off. So, you know, we are kicking it off by exploring that rich tapestry of our workforce that's so diverse in generations, woven from the threads of the baby boomers to the Gen X's, the millennials, and the Gen Z's. And with each of those groups bringing a different perspective that's unique to them to the table. Often their perspectives are pivotal in the experiences that they provide to all of us, as well as in their own experience and how they experience the workflow, the workforce. And so you'd look at things like the advent of the internet or the impact of social media. Those are pivotal things that occur, events that occurred throughout these generations that have defined to some degree aspects of that generation at that time.
Invention of the cell phone.
Yeah, right.
That's a huge
Yes.
one.
So the key generations that we typically are surrounding ourselves around now that are still alive and in play are the silent generation. That was from 1928 to 1945. So if you were born in that time frame, you could still be with us today. And I don't know if you might not be doing anything in technology, but you will be using technology, right? Technology is impacting you and influencing you differently than it did back in, the 1950s, for example. The baby boomers from 1946 to 1964. And then we move to Generation X, 1965 to 1980, which
That's us.
has a big swath of people in that category.
Yeah.
Then you get in terms of in the workforce, still working,
Yeah.
still
Still
getting their
working.
hands dirty, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to the millennials. And the millennials or Gen Ys, 1981 to 1996. Those are the individuals that we're handing the workforce off to. They're the up and coming senior managers and vice presidents and CEOs of organizations, if they're not already there.
Yeah.
And then you have the Gen Zs. And the Gen Zs are from 1997 to 2012. Now think about that, 2012. Wow, you know what? If you're in the workforce and you were born in 2012,
Well, you're
you
too young to be in the
you got to be
workforce.
some kind of a
You're
genius.
illegal.
But
you're right around
97,
the corner.
right? Yeah, but 97 you could be,
Yeah,
right? If
yeah,
you were in the
yeah,
beginning
for
part of
sure.
that, you could be in the
Definitely.
workforce, right?
Yeah.
But, there is one more generation, and this generation hasn't quite gotten to the point where they are um, they are providing impact to the entire world because of how they have been influenced. But this generation is Generation Alpha. And these are the individuals that were born from 2012 to today. And within that time frame, they're still so young that that they really haven't contributed to things in our society that can impact our society. But and some have, right? You hear some really young kids who are some influencer star who did something, and right, you have some of that that's happening, which is interesting too, because that is also an impact of their particular generation and capabilities that are afforded to their particular generation that other generations didn't have. Um, but for the most part, they're not the active ones forming and shaping and manipulating how society interacts and the impacts of everything that's influencing society today. Those are the boomers, the X's, the millennials, the Z's that are really in the mix into that category. But, Kevin, what do you think makes understanding these generational perspectives so crucial in our conversation today?
Oh, you hit on it. It is the perspective. It's if you think about how drastically different each one of these generations grew up. Look at a baby boomer. They're a post-war era that grew up in more of a rebuilding phase after World War II, and millennials are more of a work-life balance mentality and grew up with rapid technological changes throughout their lifetime. And that's going to make a massive difference in how you view and how you address things in the real world, in the professional world. And I believe with these varying perspectives, it's kind of hard sometimes to avoid conflict in the workplace. But also, because of these varying perspectives, there's different degrees of success and varying perspectives and varying viewpoints and multiple ideas coming from different ways of thinking can lead to innovation and inclusion. So I
Yeah.
think that's huge. In my opinion, I really do feel that the more diversity from a generational perspective you have in a working team, the better the outcome. And I think we're going to get into some examples of that later too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I can share you an example of I was doing a presentation to a graduate class at Iowa State University in uh, materials engineering.
Hmm.
And in that presentation, I shared with them and it was about AI and the state of AI today and how fast it's evolving. And in that presentation, I made a point to saying, if you take a step back and you look at the position of technology that your class, the class that's sitting here, your age group was born into, when you were born into this world of where we were with technology, you already had some of the most advanced technology that we've ever seen. You've had cell phones already. You had online communications. Video calls were in place. You have um, high end laptops, right? You have cloud computing was in place, so a lot of your schooling was done on a Chromebook where your data was stored in the cloud, right? The concepts were already there for that generation today, and that's currently in college. And if you take a step back into the generation prior to that, that generation had already been born with a lot of technology that we didn't have advantage of having. And so when you're starting at a point where you have the um, the advantage of having more information, and that's the key. It's not the technology, it's what the technology brings, but more information at your fingertips to grow and mature yourself as you become a professional in whatever field you're going to be. You have the ability to potentially be more successful than your predecessor generations for that reason. And AI is another example of that. Now, you have this generation alpha who's being born into this sector of technology, and they're going to have even more information at their fingertips than anyone else has had from the moment they were born to the moment that they're going to go into college.
Yeah, for
And that,
sure. I mean, information is power, right? We've always said, data is the new gold.
yeah,
Well, and if you think about it, businesses operate based on how quickly you can process and leverage that information, leverage that data, whether it be for forecasting or for budgeting purposes or for whatever. It's a competitive advantage to be able to take that information and do something with it and do it quickly. And I feel like that's where the the newer generations are going to have. Here's the deal, though. Newer generations, yeah, they're going to grow up with this amazing technology, and they're going to grow up. The alpha generations are going to grow up. AI is already going to be extremely mature by the
yeah,
time they're really using it in the workplace. What's that going to look like, man? That's going to be crazy.
yeah.
And
You know
the
what I told them?
expectations on that generation are going to just be higher because of that. That's concerning a little bit, isn't it?
Maybe, yeah, maybe the expectations will be, but we don't know what that's going to be like because we haven't experienced it. But
It's
I did tell him this. I shared this with him. I'm like, look, when the internet came about, I was lucky enough to be working in my career when the internet really took off into what we know it is today, like at the early stages where we're trying to commercialize it and figure out how we'll monetize it and embrace it into our organizations. And when that took off, I remember having that same feeling of, oh my gosh, think about all the data I
yeah.
have access to, all the stuff I can learn just by going in a search engine and searching for it and getting the article and being able to read this information. The difference now is that not only can you access all that information, but you can digest it. That's what AI is doing for you. AI is helping you digest masses amounts of information extremely fast, way faster than traditional means, traditional meaning the internet, right?
Well, not only that, help you solve problems you didn't even know you had before you started using
Yeah,
them.
right.
That's
Or didn't even know how you were going to solve it, right? So that's what makes it so interesting. I think this generation has a ton of advantages ahead of them, and the generations today that are currently in their careers and working through all of this stuff, it's also equally important to be advantageous about figuring out how to use this technology, not just for the handoff to the next generation, but to take advantage of everything that you can in your current state.
yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure. So I guess for the sake of moving on, what would you say is the biggest takeaway related to this first segment or this first discussion topic? Um, Generational perspectives. Why do they matter?
Yeah, here's the thing. Here's my biggest learning that I've had in my career working with individuals of other generations. And my biggest learning has been that every generation is hungry to want to succeed. And success comes from diving in and learning and making your mark, right? It really comes from making your mark. How you make your mark? Well, everyone goes about it a little bit different. Every generation goes about it a little different. But at the end of the day, how they go about it, that part matters. And that part matters because as a manager or a leader, I want to be able to understand and embrace the perspectives of all of the employees that are working for me and their approach to solving problems. Because, case in point, because this generation has had access to technology far longer than prior generations, their brains can be wired uh, to deduce answers different than how we arrived at it. And so being open to challenge your own assumptions when you're working through challenges or problems or thoughts or concepts or inventions, whatever it might be, and accept some of the thinking that these other generations can bring your way. It could be very advantageous for us all.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic we have here. So, problem solving approaches across these generations. And I think it's fascinating when you think about how these different generations bring different approaches to problem solving. I mean, some lean more towards more of an analog approach. You know, you think about the folks that didn't grow up with technology in their hands from day one. Others, the digital natives, we can call them, um, they're different. They have a different perspective. They know what it means to be able to go find answers quickly, because they have a supercomputer sitting in the palm of their hand most of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a pretty interesting uh, combination. And then you got Gen X somewhere in the middle where we can kind of understand both perspectives of that. We grew up without technology, really. I mean, I even remember in high school, Jason, when I was going to high school, there was no computer lab at my school. Most schools couldn't afford to build a computer lab yet.
Yeah.
So it was like I really wanted to get into computers. We had a computer later when I got towards my college age, but in high school, I really didn't have that much that I could do on a computer yet. We
Yeah.
had gaming systems, the old Atari 2600s.
Yeah, yeah. You say gaming systems today, people are like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you had a computer?" No, no, that's not the kind of gaming
No, no, no,
systems
no.
we had.
No,
No,
this thing, half the time you'd put a cartridge in it, it wouldn't work. You'd have to blow on it
blow
just
on
to get the dust off.
it.
But that was, different perspective. And
Yeah,
then you get into college, and then when you're in college, you start to kind of get introduced to the computers and what you can do with computers. I remember I was fascinated when I first realized that I could use a computer to do a 2D drawing in Adobe Illustrator.
yeah,
I was like, oh my God, I could take what I drew over here on paper into Adobe Illustrator, recreate this and make a logo out of it. Are you kidding me? This is
yeah,
amazing. That
yeah.
kind of stuff fascinated me. So
Even
when
going
you,
back, Kevin, you talk about that, like the differences in tech, right? Even going back
yeah,
probably 5 years or 6 years before that, I did have a computer, right? I had a whole build that I had did, and I was young, I was 12, right? And in that time, I
you
had
were, you must have come from money.
no, 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 no. I came from brains.
Well, where'd you get the computer that you stole it?
No, no, man. I learned how to find a cost-effective way to get a machine and get a build put together. And back then you could make a lot of money picking up cans. So I used to pick
Yeah,
up cans and take them
I
to the
remember those
recycler
days.
so I have money, right? So I was very, very economic in figuring out how to build this thing out. Anyway, my point was, I remember buying a sketchboard. It was this plastic board that had a long wand on it, and you would put a piece of paper on it, and you would take the wand and you can trace whatever was on the paper, and it would come up on the screen. And just watching that happen, I was intrigued by. I was like, "Holy, this is old! This is so awesome! Just think of what you could do." Now, compared to what we could do today, or even compared to what you could do 5 years later, that was garbage, right? But in the moment, that was really cool stuff because we had never saw anything like that before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that just goes to show how far it's come in such a short amount of time. I mean, it's not like we're one foot out the door and another on a banana peel here waiting to retire. We still got a good decade left to contribute to the industry, or maybe even longer.
Yeah,
But but a lot has changed in a short amount of time from the time we both got into our, I guess you can call it post college, beginning of our career phase, and then beyond.
yeah,
And it's amazing, like you mentioned the advent of the internet and how that drastically changed things. I remember that as well because I had just kind of started my real career as well. And one of the first things I was hired to help with was the whole Y2K concern that everything was going to just go all to hell when the clocks struck midnight on the year
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah.
Luckily, that didn't end up being much of anything, but there was a lot that was creating jobs back then. The fear of what are the computers going to do when they can't handle the calendar when it enters into a new millennial.
Yeah. Absolutely,
And we
man.
all woke up the morning of January 1st, 2000, and nothing happened. Literally
Yeah.
nothing had
I can
happened.
remember being so scared, man, and just not like knowing that my stuff was correct because I put the time and effort into making sure I had my stuff working right, but I didn't know what other people were going to miss in their
Yeah,
work, right?
yeah,
And there
dude.
was so much dependent upon other people. You had to rely on everyone. As a country, you had to rely, well, as a world, you had to rely on everyone to
Yeah.
fix their bad code
Well,
and
everything
have it ready
everything
by
you
then.
kept hearing was, oh, that most of these systems that are make up our critical infrastructure are so old that they weren't programmed to think past the year 2000. And
Yeah.
it was almost like some fear propaganda that somebody just decided to make up and try to scare the hell out of everybody with, and then it
Well,
ended up being nothing.
but that's a good example too, right? If you look at the thinking approaches that was used, that's a thinking approach that was rooted back in the 70s. And uh, generally, what happened here is because even in the 70s, we were still using punch cards, and most coding was punch cards that were related to then ones and zeros, ons and off switches, right? So that's what the holes in the punch card was related to in a certain sequence made up a certain number of bits to another certain number of bytes to however you were going to do your work. So the challenge with that was that's a very mathematical way of thinking. And, from the 50s to the 70s, our approach was very mathematical. Everything was we were in the weeds, thinking through the numbers. And when we were trying to think of ways to increase or become more efficient, we looked at things like, oh, well, the year is blah blah blah, right? Well, you can, you know, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit year. Why can't you just do that? Yeah, and it'll save space. We don't care about that century thing. I mean, it'll be forever before we get to a century. So why do we have to worry about it, right? Efficient thinking, thinking in numbers, but not really thinking through the entire process. And then all of a sudden, the century creeps up on us, and we're turning it over, and people are like, "Uh oh, we didn't think of that one."
This is gonna break something.
Yeah. Now, because I don't have a year, a century on my year, all of those, are going to revert back to oh 01, 65, oh 01, 89, right? Whatever it was, instead of 1989 or 1965, right? That's what it was going to revert back to. So it was insane. It was insane. In fact, I did hear this report just last week. I think it was the Doge department had made a proclamation. They had saved so much money. It was in the trillions of dollars they saved, right? And
This is
then they went
recent.
back. Yeah, they went back and they looked at it, and it was a clerical error because there was a year that was not properly configured.
Yeah.
And so it was saying that they were paying out no, not they weren't paying out, but there were people eligible for Social Security that were like 130 years old or something like that, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
way
yeah,
out there, right?
yeah. I
Yeah,
remember this.
because the year was invalid.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's still that stuff still sits out there, and it's still lingering around, and it still has its effects.
yeah. It to get to kind of bring us back on track here. Um, when being in a unique perspective and a unique situation as a Gen Xer, I've been able to see a couple sides in my professional career. I remember when I was the young guy that, nobody really wanted to trust the young guys who would come in with these new, fresh ideas, right?
Oh yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, yeah, well, what do you know? You don't have enough experience to really be coming in here and offering your ideas. you have to kind of earn the respect with the old regime a little bit more than I feel you have to do that today. And maybe it's just me, maybe it's just my perspective on it, but I try to think back to when I was new in the corporate world and I was struggling with that. And I try not to be that person to the new generation that we're going to be handing the torch to. Um, and I try to think along the lines of how are they coming at this problem? Are they trying to approach this same problem from a different perspective than me?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can try my best to understand that, and not all the time do I understand it. Many times I'm like, what the hell is this person thinking? Um, so I'll pull them aside and I'll say, hey, help me understand where are you coming from with this idea, this concept, this theory that what you're saying can help us get to the finish line. And I found that in every single example that I could come up with in my head of when that's happened, it's always worked out for the better when I don't just shoot them down. I stop and pull them aside and say, okay, help me. I want to understand where you're coming from here.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with you today. I'll tell you that right up front. I don't. But I need to understand why you're so passionate about your position on this, because if I can understand that, it might help me appreciate why you're coming at it from that angle. And every time that's ever happened and they've explained themselves, even if I didn't completely get on board with their idea, the end result has always been better.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Well, that speaks to something too, though, right? It speaks to a couple of things, but one is that, as a leader, and this has happened throughout my entire career, even in the positions that I serve today, with years of experience. There is always someone else, especially in technology. There's always someone else who feels like they have more experience, and they're going to one up you in some kind of way. That's a given. That's going to happen. But good leaders and good technology leaders are the ones that will take a step back and do exactly what you just did, is say, you know what how do I keep this person involved, keep this person thinking, and how do I engage them in a way that embraces an understanding of what they're thinking, because through that I can also guide them to maybe see where there's either flaws, or and help them guide them to a good solution, or I might learn where I had flaws, and I might then be able to be guided to a
That's the
good
whole
solution.
point in it right
Yeah,
there. You just
yeah,
hit it. It's all about being able to understand their perspective so that there's an opportunity for you to grow or to open your mind to new ideas and new concepts, but also to bring them into your way of thinking a bit so that they can at least understand why you're coming at it from the angle that you're coming at it, and they can appreciate that, because sometimes the younger you are, the less you realize there's some tribal knowledge up here that a lot of us depend
yeah,
on in a business setting that they're not thinking about yet.
yeah,
And it's
exactly.
based on getting your hand slapped a couple times, or getting burned on a few projects for you to gain that tribal knowledge to know, okay, I'm not going to come at it from that perspective again down the road. I'm going to learn from this, and that helps you to train them how they can learn from that mistake you might have made long time ago when you were their age.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great for the leaders. um, what would you say, Kevin, then would be a takeaway for this segment, and even specifically for those who are um, are still up and coming in the industry?
As a leader, or from the perspective of somebody new in the industry looking to grow?
Someone new.
Okay. Don't get frustrated and pissed off at your supervisor or your manager immediately just because they don't buy into every idea or concept that you have. First off, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
The tribal knowledge we're speaking of here in the real world, it trumps their even if their desire is strong to be your best friend or to be the coolest boss you could possibly be to them, their tribal knowledge is going to trump that every time.
Yeah.
They're 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 moving forward to a common goal with you in hopes to bring you along and help you to not make some of the same mistakes they've made on their way to where they are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key takeaway here is that if you can be open-minded to that and not just get, butt hurt and pissed off every time somebody's not doing what you want them to do, and you're open to learning too, you're going to find most good managers are going to be open to hearing you out as well because they want to understand. They know there's an opportunity there for them to learn from you just as much as they can teach you.
Absolutely. I want to add one thing to that, Kevin, too. And as you're saying that, it made me think about those something that people can relate to. So, you hear the stories of, oh, I paid my dues, I've you know, did all the struggles for so many years. I've lifted the brain
Done my
muscle.
time.
I've done my time. Here's what that means. All of that means. If if for all of you that have been busting your brain to figure out a problem, solve a problem, to overcome a challenge to the point where your head is so tense that it hurts. That's what they're talking about. And they've put in decades of that to resolve problems, going through the fire and getting a solution and learning as a result of doing that work that they want to be able to empower you with so that you get there easier without the same amount of pain that they had to go through.
Yeah,
So,
usually it's coming from a good place. In most cases,
yeah,
it's coming from a good place, and they realize that they're doing you a favor by not catering to your every desire in most
yeah.
cases, especially professionally. That's going to help you out in the long run, believe me.
All right, man. Well, that was gold, man. That was really good stuff. I think it's time to get into our first break, and then we'll come back and we'll dive into the rest of this topic.
Sounds good.
Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Worry no more. You can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Imagine taking a proactive, deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless specifically authorized by your team. ThreatLocker helps you do this and provides a full audit of every action, allowed or blocked, for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operation is fully supported by their US-based support team. Stop the exploitation of trusted applications within your organization to keep you running efficiently and secure, protected from ransomware. Worldwide, companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can mitigate unknown threats and ensure compliance for your organization, visit threatlocker.com.
All right, welcome back from the break. So, Jason, let's jump into this next topic here, and then try to leave the listeners with some Gen X wisdom, some parting wisdom, and nuggets they can take back with them. And then I've got a very special game we're going to get to tonight.
All right,
And
all right, all right.
you know what's on the line, right?
Yeah,
It,
what?
it's either going to be you owe me a round of drinks, or I'm going to owe you a round of drinks. But that's going to be the stakes for the game tonight. And
Okay.
whatever our next conference is, we'll pay up.
All
But
right.
before we get into any of that, let's talk about leveraging technology to tackle learning curves. And we all know, you and I both know this too, technology can be both a bridge or a barrier when it comes to the differences between generations.
Yeah.
We've seen these tech fluency gaps play out in the professional settings time and time again. And what I notice is that a millennial, for example, is going to be far more willing or eager to bring a technology based solution to the table to solve a problem where maybe a boomer or even some older Gen Xers are a little less eager to embrace some of those newer technologies when it comes to solving problems. They're a little more reserved, a little more. I think really what it comes down to is their risk tolerance is lower. But what you see in what I'm starting to see is that when you pair the two most diverse individuals with their ways of thinking, maybe the most conservative boomer in your office with the most technologically savvy millennial, you get some pretty interesting outcomes. And I think because of that, companies are starting to embrace something that they call tech swap initiatives. And all that really means is that they're swapping information between the generations to bridge the gaps that one might have or the reservations that one might have, to help each other out. You know,
Yeah.
the older regime is kind of, here's the way we used to do it, and here's more of
Yeah.
a face to face personal way of addressing this issue. And the millennials like, well, yeah, you don't need to do that anymore. You can just text, or
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
break out your phone, and there's an app for that. And the interesting thing is the outcomes that you get by doing this.
Yeah, dude, this is such a cool idea too. You know, I love the way that it combines the best from two different generations to build something or to have a reward out of it, right? Either generation can get something out of it. That's what I really love about it. You know, I think about other programs like this where older employees can share their industry knowledge and feel like they have a place to share what they've learned over the years to their younger colleagues. And at the same time, what happens is everyone contributes to the entire company's growth, right? Because there's to as we said earlier, right? The older employees who have been to all the battles have learned a lot of the skills challenges and have worked their way through some of these things, have techniques to offer the younger groups, and the younger groups have enhanced ways of navigating through some of this stuff that the older guys can pick up on. I've seen it firsthand as an engineer engineering code, and this is a great example because how the engineering practices, the foundations that you use, for the most part the foundations are the same, but the practices have changed.
Yeah,
And there are newer practices and there are older practices, and there have been success in both of them. But but what I found was, as the older guy coming into a team that I'm leading, that has a team of engineers, and I'm leading them, and they have a lot of younger practice ideas, newer practice ideas.
yeah,
It's important for me to understand those practice ideas and apply them. But here's where the difference was: because I have been to the battle many times before, I can, if I'm open minded enough, I can understand the intent of the newer model ideas, the newer
yeah,
practice ideas,
yeah,
and I can combine it with my history of what works, what worked very well and what didn't work very well, and give a more efficient outcome to the application of those ideas. And that happens. That would happen often, right? We'd sit in a situation and we're talking about a challenge, and we're like, okay, I understand the new practice. This is how it works. You do this, 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 and this. The reasons for those things are because it gives you this, 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 and this, and these are important. But here's something else you need to think about. In this particular case, we need to do Y. And although that practice helps you with all the other things, it doesn't really help you with Y. Here's the gap. Here's how we can solve for Y. And we can get over that hump and we can keep moving. And then as soon as we do that, the younger generation learns that part. They learn how to identify the gaps, right? Not just sticking to the cookie cutter what they were taught. And then the older generation has to understand the newer stuff so that they can even help them identify the gaps. So that's where that blend comes in at. And I think programs like this work very well for events like that I was just referring to.
Yeah, I mean, and this is nothing new. I mean, we both grew up where there were mentee programs and mentorships where, you know, you had somebody above you that you could go to when you met a challenge in your business that you didn't know how to deal with, and you leaned on them for the guidance to get through that. This is really no different, but this is kind of more, um, uh, almost less of a mentorship and more of a two-way street.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing about it is, you know, when you think about the older ways of solving problems or brainstorming, you know, you think more along the lines of, you know, even webinars are getting dated nowadays, but webinars, online courses, forums, you know, classroom style, face-to-face training. Let's go hit the whiteboard and draw this thing up, right? Let's go brainstorm and draw a bunch of notes on paper and then take it back, and then we can digitize it after the fact. Um, where where younger technology savvy um, professionals might say, "Well, hey, I have you used Slack? Have you tried Discord? Do you use IM?" They're going to bring new technologies to the table to solve the same problems in a different way,
Yeah.
and that's what's so cool about it. I love the fact that companies are starting to embrace this this movement of sharing knowledge both ways.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, it's somewhat unique for you and I. Not that we're extreme on one side or the other. I can understand both perspectives here. And the interesting thing about being in the generation that you and I grew up in, we know what it's like to have to solve these problems without the technology, and we know the benefits of solving these problems with the technology.
Yeah.
So I embrace kind of both sides of the equation here because I've used both sides.
Yeah. It's like
And
doing math without a calculator and doing math with a
yeah,
calculator. And
yeah,
just
yeah,
complex math too, not just easy math, right? Complex math without a calculator, complex math with a calculator. You could probably do it both ways,
yeah,
but you can certainly appreciate using a calculator too.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I just love that having that perspective kind of changes my outlook on things, and certainly doesn't make me any better. It just makes I feel like we're the last of a dying generation that is able to appreciate both sides of the equation because we came from both sides of the equation. We were at that right age
Yeah.
when technology really exploded that
Yeah.
we could appreciate it, but we also didn't come from that.
But I don't think people really fully embrace that. I mean, we do because we went through it. But I think which is sad. I don't think that the majority of the world looks at our generation and takes a step back and be like, "Oh my gosh, if you really look at it, those are the individuals that were there at the most um, disruptive parts of technology as we know it right now to today. They've been in that sweet spot of having to understand new tech, multiple versions of new disruptive tech, how it would apply to the average person, how it would apply to an organization to take full advantage of it and get up to speed and scale quickly, and had to do it not once, multiple times over in the course of their career. Right? That's what we're talking about. Prior to
Yeah,
that time frame, and we talk about AI being invented way back in the 50s, but it wasn't mainstream, right? It wasn't things that the majority of people had to solve for, had to make happen like they do today. Prior to our generation getting into the workforce, it was DOS. Prior to DOS, it was, you know, uh, uh, the tapes, real tapes on a mainframe. And, part of that, it was punch cards, right? Those were the disruptive technologies. And although those were really cool, they did a lot for us. they're not nearly as scalable in disruption as the ones that we've worked with in our career. That's where the
Yeah.
difference is.
Yeah. We used
And
to,
that's not to disregard anybody who was in those prior generations who worked with those cool technologies as well, because those were super advanced and forward thinking at the time. Now this is where we are, and we'll be looking back 20, 30, 40 years from now, and people are going to be saying, and why I only went 20, 30, and 40 years is because of the scale of advancements that's happening now compared to when we were there.
yeah, but it's moving so much
It's,
faster.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
going so much faster, and those individuals are going to look back and be like, oh, they used to have a computer and they would go in and they would ask it questions and it would answer it for them. Who would have thought that computers would just tell you what you want now? You don't have to like type it in. It'll be something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that it would be a nice way to end this episode by offering some wisdom from our perspective as the latchkey generation, Gen X. Um, and I feel like it would be beneficial for mostly younger folks to hear it from us, but only because not that we're any better or any wiser or anything like that. It's more about the perspective that we have when it comes to using a unique ability to look back and to look forward to solve problems that I feel like, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm biased a little bit, but I feel like is unique to the generation you and I were brought up in.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. And I would tell you, so let's go down that path, right? So as a Gen X representative, I often find myself in that area where I'm bridging a gap between stability and innovation, and 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 economy. you know, got to do it all, and I got to do it all on as for as less money, as least money as possible, and make it the highest performing solution that could possibly be there. Right? What advice can do you think we can give our younger generation about sustainable having a sustainable career growth? And should we leave them with our top 10 list of latchkey love?
Yeah, I think let's leave them with the 10 that we've come up with, and maybe it'll help someone. I expect it'll help someone. And if it doesn't, hey, we tried.
All
But
right.
it's a unique perspective, and it's coming from a couple guys that are, later in their career, not necessarily ready to walk out the door just yet, but we have some 20 plus years of experience behind our perspective. So I feel like there's value there,
All right. All right.
especially for the ones just entering into their professional um, venture, their professional career
Yeah.
adventure.
So let's jump into it. So, all right. So, for those of you who haven't heard the term that Kevin and I grew up with, there's a term that we grew up with that oftentimes kids in our generation, where the Generation X kids, were referred to as the latchkey generation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You heard that often. I didn't really like that term so much, but here's what it amounted to. What does the term latchkey really mean? So, from a cultural and economic standpoint, during the 1970s and 80s, there was a rise in two income households and an increase in divorce rates, meaning many children had to be self sufficient for part of the day because their parent that they were with had to go to work, had a different job, they had to find a way to get more income. So these kids were left, to kind of fend for themselves, right? Figure out how to be self sufficient. Second takeaway was independence. So latchkey kids learn to handle household tasks like preparing snacks, doing homework alone, and entertaining themselves, and to manage their own schedules without adult supervision. Now, I could tell you I spent many a nights sitting there at the table or in my room trying to get my homework done, just knocking my head, trying to figure out how to do this stuff, right? I had to own it. I had the responsibility to get it done, and if I didn't do it, it was my own fault. I
It
had no
wasn't
one
going to get
else to
done
blame.
either.
Yeah,
If you didn't
yeah,
do it, it wasn't going to get done.
yeah. It wasn't going to get done. Yeah, that's exactly right. Here's the third part to this: the impact on behavior. So the environment is often credited with fostering self-reliance. Right? When we think about this latchkey environment, so self-reliance and resourcefulness. And so the traits that also shaped their work habits and attitudes as they entered in adulthood. So you'll see a lot of the Gen Xers who are resilient go-getters. They're determined, they're driven, they take ownership, they're going to make things happen, right? Those are the individuals you see in the workforce because of this latchkey model that they had to grow up with, in our time frame. So overall, being a part of the latchkey generation meant growing up with a strong sense of independence, as well as the resiliency and adaptability that came from having to navigate life without constant parental guidance. That's it.
Yeah, and the whole term latchkey was really based on the fact that you and I, when we got home from school, we didn't necessarily always have a parent at the house to let us in. That's why we carried our own latchkey to get ourselves in the door.
Yeah.
We'd get home from school, there's nobody there.
You didn't
We had
have
to
a
make
parent
our
picking
own.
you up from school. You better walk them 2 feet.
Oh, you walk your ass,
Walk
you
them two
bet you
feet
walk.
all the way back down to the house because
Wait,
nobody's getting you.
now we're starting to sound really old. But was it uphill both ways, 5 miles in the snow? Okay, we're not saying that. But
No.
what we are saying is that if we could leave you with our tips, um, know that they're coming from a place where we weren't always surrounded by technology. We had to be um, resourceful.
Yeah.
We saw a burst of technology in our lifetimes, and still are. With the advent of AI, we're starting to see a second um, level of burst. The first being the internet, of course. But
So,
I guess my first tip to the younger generation would just be mindful of that. Be adaptable and be resourceful. And why this matters is, we came from a generation where we saw this technological shift go from analog to digital, and we saw it in hyper speed. And we had to learn lots of new software. We had to learn how to fix jammed printers, and we had to do all this stuff on our own when nobody was around. We had to embrace new tools but not rely on them blindly, because technology wasn't what it is today. So I guess my first piece of advice is be prepared and be ready to solve problems with or without the technology.
yeah, that's a good
Technology is
one.
great. Leverage it for everything that you can, but when it's not there, be resourceful without the technology.
Figure it out, man.
Yeah,
Just
figure
figure
it
it
out.
out. Yeah.
You're
So
If you can
here's,
figure out the technology, you're damn well smart enough to figure it out without the technology. You're there.
yeah, yeah. All right. So here's one: balance independence with teamwork. And here's why this is important. When we were kids and we are trying to figure stuff out, I'll go all the way back to when I had my first computer when I was 12 and I was trying to figure out how to do stuff on this computer. I had a buddy that also was doing the same thing. And so if couldn't figure something out, I mean, we had nobody else to rely on because nobody knew how to do this stuff, right? There was a very small percentage of people in the world who was doing this work that we were doing, and we were kids doing it, right? So you couldn't go look it up on the internet like you guys can do today or ask AI or anything like that. If you were lucky, maybe you had connections where you had a modem and you can do a dial-up service and get on a bulletin board system and post a question on a bulletin board server and wait for someone to answer you a few days later, if you were lucky. But we didn't have all that stuff, right? So what I would do is I jump on myself a little bicycle and I bicycle myself all the way across the town to the other side of town to my buddy's house. I'm like, dude, here's what I'm trying to do. Have you figured out how to do this? He's like, nah, man, I don't know how to do that, but I found this really cool chess game. We should take a look at it, right? Well, we did that. That was our collaboration. And that's where teamwork came in at. I could spin my wheels all day long, but once I started to reach out to people that I could collaborate with, I might get there a little bit better. It's important, right? Independence is good. It can drive you. Know when to use teamwork as well. Show the initiative and have personal accountability to the tasks that you're doing. When you don't know how to do it, be willing to say, hey, I don't know how to do this. You want to help me with this? Doesn't matter what level you are at. I don't care if you're a VP. I don't care if you're chief of a role somewhere. It doesn't matter. You need to have that same level of saying, hey, I don't know how to do this. What do you think? Right? And that balance of being independent and teamwork will level you out, and you'll learn, and your colleagues will learn.
Yeah, yeah. What about bridging old and new? I mean, I remember when I first started my career, Jason, I didn't have the internet in my pocket. I had a pager. We had the internet, but you had to be sitting behind a keyboard and a monitor to use it. It wasn't in my pocket like it is today. Now, believe me, I love having it in my pocket. But I do also realize that there's value in knowing how to solve problems without it being in my pocket. And that goes back to um, being fluent in analog and digital communication.
Yeah.
Know when it makes more sense to go have an in-person conversation or a chat. Know when a phone call is better than an email or an instant message or a text. Not everything needs to be resolved through an SMS text message. A lot of people today, at least, and this will phase out eventually, but a lot of people in the professional world don't appreciate that kind of communication like a lot of the very young generation appreciates that kind of
Yeah.
communication. So just be
Yeah.
mindful of it. This is advice for when you're dealing with people that are a little bit older.
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is a good one. Loyalty and career longevity. There is a big divide in I'm going to say with our generation and today's generation. And the reason why is, and I learned this when I first started working in the workforce. It was a little bit of a shocker to me because I was learning how the workforce operates. And then looking back at where we are today is totally different. How the workforce operated then was a model in which people generally would stay with an organization for a long time. If you got into an organization, it was not uncommon for you to be 30 plus years with one organization, having multiple anniversaries, getting, multiple awards for being there, all these different anniversaries. Um, you were rewarded for that, right? It was looked at as a very positive thing. And that came out of the IBM era, where the IBM era in business in the, I don't know what it was, the 40s to, it might have been even further back than that, but definitely 40s to late 80s. The IBM era of business was in play.
Mhm.
That meant the common standard for business was you found a job, you stayed there, you were loyal to your job for an enormous amount of time. You showed up every day in a suit and tie. And I did say suit and tie because that was the standard that was started by IBM. You don't go to work unless you have a suit and tie and you're well dressed. And that happened all the way up until the late 80s, early 90s, in which that started to fade out to just wearing a tie and slacks, and then faded out further into the late 90s where it was just dress pants and a dress shirt, and then faded out into the 2000s where it was, oh, we don't really care, just come with whatever you want. so so there is a difference, right, in the generations and what they were rooted in at the beginning. So uh, my advice here is find the right stability. That isn't the case anymore where you go with a company and you stay for an enormous amount of time of your career. And that's because technology changes at a much faster rate than companies do.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have technologists who are like, well, I want to go learn this now, and you guys don't have that as something that I can learn. So in order to keep my skills up, I need to move on. So you see that often. It is, and that's okay. But as employers, we want to feel like we can rely on people for longer than a year or two.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
reason why we're hiring you.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. There's a lot to that loyalty aspect.
Yeah.
Um, how about viewing work-life balance as a long game and not a short-term fix? I mean, we hear a lot about work-life balance today. A lot of more progressive companies embrace it and promote it. And I kind of think about when we were growing up, we had to learn all about work-life balance the hard way because we were navigating, pressures of not having two parents around all the time, um, big demands on our personal time and school time, and figuring out how to balance everything. We were getting burned out at an early age and didn't even realize we were getting burned out. We didn't know what
Yeah.
that was. We didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
And so I would say if you get good at setting boundaries for yourself, both from scheduling for business and for your job and your personal time, you can sustain that for a very long time throughout your entire career. Know when to, put it down, because burnout is a real thing. Trust me. There are times when we all have to burn the midnight oil, but don't make that your normal routine. You need the work-life balance, and it can be healthy in a corporate environment and not be frowned upon.
Yeah.
A lot of people think,
Absolutely.
oh, the old guys, all they want to do is, they don't believe in this work-life balance thing, or they don't believe in a hybrid workforce, or they don't believe in trying to do your job remotely at all. They don't embrace that. That's not true at all. A lot of the older regime is starting to embrace that more because they grew up without that and they can appreciate that, and they understand that it's very hard if you're burning the candle at both ends and you're burning yourself out. They
Yeah.
can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. How about resilience through economic up and downs? So one of the things that Gen Xers have learned is that sometimes the markets are going to be great and everyone's going to have a little extra money in their pockets, and other times the markets are going to be true dog doo doo, and and you're going to be scrapping. And if you're not scrapping and you're still spending at the same rate you was when you thought the waters were great and you had a lot of money in your pocket, you're not going to be doing so well. So you have to adjust. That's important, not only in just how you manage your family, how you manage your own personal lives, but how you manage your career. And so you can always be chasing after the almighty dollar by jumping off to another great thing. But you know what? That great thing might not work. That you might hit an economic downturn, and now that maybe that wasn't the greatest decision in the moment because you was just chasing it for money. It has to be a balance, right? So be real, take a realistic outlook on your finances, your career trajectory. Determine what path you really want to follow. Don't jump the gun too soon just because you think, oh, this has some great upsides but has a lot of risk. Or maybe you're in a better position to take risks than you would be if than you were be 5-10 years ago. Then go for it, take those risks. But in all of those things, have a contingency plan, have a backup, know what you're going to do if things just go south.
Yeah. Here's a good one. Effective interpersonal skills. Now, a lot of workplaces that have a lot of a heavy Gen X presence, they grew up when communication was more face to face. There weren't as many emails, there weren't as many text messages and things. We hit on this a little bit, but cultivate your emotional intelligence. Understand what it means to go walk into someone's office and have a conversation face to face. A lot of people will appreciate the fact that you do that, even if you're not comfortable in that setting. And you're never too young to improve on your social skills or your interpersonal skills. That is we call that a soft skill in the corporate world. And I believe it's one of the most important soft skills you can have. Communication, face to face communication without the technology is equally as important as any technology you're ever going to learn in your career. That's a huge one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, mentorship and reverse mentorship. This is something we talked about a few minutes
Oh,
ago
yeah.
earlier in the episode, and we talked about the ability to pay it forward and pay it in reverse. Um, as you learn and you get more knowledgeable, share that. Help lift people up to get that same level of knowledge. It doesn't have to be a dog eats world competition, right? You don't have to take on everyone. All you're trying to do is to be better. And you know what is even better than that? Helping everybody else up with you along the way. I've
Mm-hmm.
got one thing I've always one mantra. I have several, but this is one mantra I go back to often that I always tell my employees. I don't want to be thought of as the smartest person in the room, because the smartest person in the room is the collective efforts of everyone in the room. And if we're not using the collective efforts of everyone, then we're short-sighted on the solutions we're trying to build.
You're
That
better together.
Yeah, you're better together. So in order to get better together, you need to mentor forward and mentor behind, right? And if everyone did that, if everyone said, to the older people, hey guys, let me help you with some of the new stuff we're working on. I want to help you guys understand this stuff. And if those guys went back and be like, hey, let me help you navigate some of these challenges that I know we've been through before. And if it works for you, great. If not, don't worry about it, right? If you're willing to pay it forward and pay it back, then you're doing exactly that, and everyone's better together.
Yeah, for sure. What about workplace politics and integrity? I feel like this one's huge. And again, another soft skill. Basically, it's important that you understand your corporate dynamics at the company you work for. What makes your organization tick? What's the culture like within your organization? But you have to maintain your ethics. You have to maintain your integrity. Integrity is still one of the most important aspects that any human can possess. um, and honesty. Be honest, be real, have that integrity, and treat people well. Your reputation is long lasting, it will follow you for your entire career. Don't step on people just because maybe they're not as high as you on the food chain at your corporation. Believe me, you'll appreciate the fact that you treated people well all the way. And if you
Yeah,
ever reach the top, so to speak, you're not going to be there forever. Nobody's there forever. So treat people well, and the rest will take care of itself. Just be a good person.
yeah. And the worst thing you want to do is go through your entire career, which in hindsight, when you look back at it, isn't very long, right?
No,
It
and
and
it
you
goes fast.
Yeah, it goes fast. And you look back and you're like, wow, what did I do? I was a real jerk most of the time in those over those years to the people
Well,
that
you
that
wouldn't
I
even
was
have to
with.
think about that because people will let you know
Yeah,
you
they will
were.
tell you. They will tell you. You come to your retirement party and no one shows up, you'll know.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, how about this? Lifelong learning and continuous growth. Look, another one of my mantras. I like to follow a pattern where I reinvent myself every 3 years. Ironically, I'm coming up on that 3 year stint right now, and and in that cycle, I force myself to learn something that I didn't know before. In a way, I didn't know it, and it could be anything. And I found over the years, there's always something. There's always something that I can expand my knowledge on somewhere. And that level of continuous learning and growth is something that allows me, my personal opinion, allows me to continue to operate across all of these generational divides. It helps me understand better how to communicate with people across all of the generations. It helps me understand how technology impacts, influences, operates across all of these generations. And it just helps me be better at the work that I do. So, always, lifelong learning, continuous growth should be something that's core to what you do.
Absolutely, man, for sure. Well, I think that's a lot of good stuff to leave people with. Hopefully, somebody took something good away from that. And you know, I pride myself on being part of Gen X. I think it was a great generation, even though we didn't have all the cool gadgetry that is around today. There was value in a lot of things that we learned along the way in being those latchkey kids that had to kind of fend for ourselves a bit. And I think it's made me a better person, both in my real world and in my corporate world. But I also don't feel it made me any better than anybody else. I think it was just a different perspective that I was able to grow up with, and I'm trying to take the most away from having that perspective,
Yeah.
and leave the next generation with even a better opportunity to be better than I was. And I think, and I, Jason, I know you on a personal level enough to know that you care enough to do the same thing. We want to leave both our corporations better. We want to leave our friends and family, having known and grown up with us,
Yeah.
better people, mentoring them in life, and learning from them mentoring us. We're always growing. We're always pursuing new things. As you said, you're always reinventing yourself every 3 years. I feel like we reinvent ourselves every day too.
Yeah.
And hopefully, along the way, we can impart some of this wisdom to people that we touch every day, whether it be through the podcast, whether it be through our corporate world that we live in every day, or whether it be in our personal lives. That's the goal. I feel like if you're pursuing that in everything you can do, you're going to end up on the better end of when we're done with our career, we'll be able to look back on it and be proud of what we did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Kevin. Let's go to another break and then we'll come back and close this out.
All right, let's do it.
Are you ready to revolutionize your business? Introducing CypherNova.ai, your partner in the transformative power of artificial intelligence. We specialize in cutting-edge AI solutions that streamline operations, optimize productivity, and drive sustainable growth. From predictive analytics to intelligent automation, our tailor-made strategies unleash the full potential of your data so you stay ahead of the curve. Take the first step toward a smarter, more efficient future. Visit us today and transform your business with the power of AI. CypherNova.ai, where innovation meets possibility.
All right. So, welcome back, everyone. We're going to close this episode out. Kevin and I were going through looking at all the things that we had, and we covered so much content in this episode that we've started running much longer than we wanted to run. And in true fashion, Kevin's games usually are very long. So we decided we're going to cut the game out for now. We'll bring that back in a different episode. But before we go, we wanted to tease you guys up with what our next episode is going to be about. And this is not one that you will not want to miss. So we have a special guest, Rico Danielson. And let me tell you a little bit about Rico. Rico is a U.S. Army combat veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. As a digital forensics expert in cell phone forensics for high-profile criminal and civil cases, Rico has a strong passion for cybersecurity, digital forensics, incident response that led him to start his firm, Fortitude Tech LLC. Rico will be on our next show. We're going to dig deep into a lot of really cutting edge thinking around digital forensics. Maybe talk about some of his past, give some background there. But this will be an exciting episode. And so you will not want to miss it. Join us for that one here in the next couple of weeks. And with that, Kevin, anything else you want to share with our guests?
No, man, I'm excited to be back at it. I'm looking forward to the next episode. Rico is going to be an amazing guest. That one, I'm really excited to interview him. He's got some fascinating stories. I've listened to some of the podcasts he's been on, and that's just going to be a lot of fun. So definitely join us for that. And we look forward to episode 2, season 4.
So here it is, guys. This is our 4th season. As you can tell, the guest list is starting to amplify more and more and more. We get suggestions and prompts from people every week to join our show as a guest. We want to bring the best content to you guys. If you have suggestions, reach out to us at Jason at cyberdistortionpodcast.com or Kevin at cyberdistortionpodcast.com, and we will respond to your inquiries for guests. But we have a fascinating lineup this year. We're having to hold people back because we can't get them scheduled close enough to get everybody on an episode throughout the season. And if we worked every week and filmed an episode multiple times a week, we still couldn't get everybody in. That being said, we want to bring the best of the best to you. So we want to hear from you on who those individuals are. Reach out to us and let us go bring them to you, because we want to bring you the best content out there. If you have not subscribed, if you're thinking about subscribing, if you know of friends that should subscribe, please send them this information, send them to the Cyber Distortion podcast, and let's get our subscriptions growing so we can get the word out around cybersecurity and AI movements. With that, we're going to close this out. We're going to thank you guys all for joining us for this first episode in season 4, and we look forward to the next one. See you then.
Thank you for watching our latest episode of the Cyber Distortion podcast. We only grow with your support. The best thing you can do to help us grow is to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, follow us on X, and tell just one friend about the show. You can find out more about us on the blog site at www.cyberdistortion.com. Our X handle is @DistortionCyber, and you can also listen to our audio-only versions of the episodes on most major streaming podcast platforms. Just search for Cyber Distortion Podcast. Until next time, take care. Cheers.